She looked at me with a half-smile, her voice low and steady. "You're dangerous." I should have laughed it off, but instead, I leaned in and whispered, "Then handle me carefully." And from that moment on, nothing between us felt simple anymore. I still remember the first time I stepped into my friend's house that summer evening. The air outside was heavy with the hum of crickets, but the moment I crossed the threshold, it felt like I'd entered a calmer world. The scent of lavender drifted faintly from somewhere down the hall, mixing with a warm, lived-in smell of polished wood and freshly brewed tea. I was only there to hang out with my buddy. At least, that's what I told myself. But as soon as his mom appeared at the doorway, I knew this visit would leave a different kind of impression. She wasn't trying to be striking. She didn't wear flashy clothes or heavy makeup. In fact, it was the opposite. She had on a soft, cream-colored blouse, sleeves gently rolled at the wrists, and a pair of simple dark jeans. Her hair was swept back casually, with a few loose strands falling against her cheek. But there was something about the way she carried herself, quiet, graceful, steady, that immediately caught my attention. "Make yourself at home," she said, her voice warm but not overly familiar. The kind of tone that carried both welcome and distance, like a door left slightly open but not fully unlocked. I nodded, smiling politely, but inside, I was already replaying the sound of her words. I noticed the way she looked at me when I spoke, not hurried, not distracted, but as if she actually listened. Her eyes, calm and steady, had a way of holding mine just a fraction longer than most people dared. My friend rushed upstairs to grab something, leaving me in the living room with her for a few moments. I tried to appear relaxed, glancing around at the shelves lined with old books and framed photographs. Family vacations, birthdays, moments frozen in time. And yet, I found myself more drawn to the soft rustle of her movements in the kitchen, the subtle rhythm of her presence filling the quiet space. When she returned, balancing a tray with 2 glasses of iced tea, she placed one in front of me. Her fingers brushed the table close to mine, and though it was the most casual of gestures, I felt a flicker of awareness run through me. "Thank you," I murmured, careful to keep my voice even. She gave a small nod, that faint smile curving her lips. Of course, it should have ended there, just a simple exchange, nothing unusual. But the room felt heavier, charged in a way I couldn't quite explain. It was like standing near a storm you couldn't see, only sense in the air. I told myself to look away, to focus on anything else. Yet when my friend finally bounded back into the room, laughing and pulling me upstairs, part of me resisted leaving. Because in those few quiet minutes, something had shifted. I wasn't just visiting my friend anymore. I had noticed her, really noticed her, and no matter how much I tried, I knew I wouldn't be able to ignore that fact again. The next day felt almost ordinary. My friend and I had spent most of the afternoon gaming, joking around like we always did. But it was when his mom returned from the market, arms full of grocery bags, that the air in the house shifted again. "Could one of you give me a hand?" she called from the doorway, her voice steady but edged with effort. I was up before my friend even reacted. Something inside me wanted to help her. No, if I was honest, it was more than that. I wanted to be near her. When I reached her, she was balancing too many paper bags against her hip. Without thinking, I stepped close and took a few from her arms. The moment our fingers brushed over the rough edge of the bag handle, a sharp awareness ran through me. Her hand was warm, her grip strong but graceful. The touch lasted only a heartbeat before she let go, but it left an afterglow, as though the skin of my hand remembered her. "Thank you," she said, a little breathless from the load. "Of course," I replied, forcing my tone to sound casual. But my chest was thudding harder than it should have. We carried the bags into the kitchen, setting them down on the counter. She began unpacking quickly, the movements practiced fluid. I joined in, handing her vegetables one by one. Our hands crossed often, me passing something over, her fingers grazing mine as she took it. It was nothing, it was everything. Each time, my stomach tightened slightly, as if my body understood something my mind wasn't ready to admit. She glanced at me once, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You're very helpful." Not many young men your age would bother with kitchen chores. I shrugged, trying to hide how much that little compliment meant. Well, I was raised right, I guess. She laughed, soft but genuine, and the sound landed in me like sunlight cutting through a cloudy day. I couldn't stop myself from smiling back, even though my friend would probably never let me live it down if he'd noticed. The moment didn't end there. As she leaned across me to place something in the fridge, her shoulder brushed lightly against mine. It was accidental, unplanned, but I felt the warmth of her closeness, the faint scent of lavender clinging to her hair. For a second, I thought she might pause, maybe even acknowledge it. Instead, she stepped back quickly, clearing her throat as if nothing had happened. But I caught it, the flicker in her eyes, the tiny hesitation. She had felt it too. The rest of the afternoon passed with easy conversation. She asked about school, about my plans, listening with genuine interest. It wasn't the kind of surface-level small talk adults usually throw at you. It was more personal, more attentive. Every time she laughed at something I said, or let her gaze linger just long enough to notice me noticing her, I felt the distance between us narrowing, even if we both pretended it wasn't. When my friend finally pulled me back into the living room, I left the kitchen reluctantly, because in that simple act of carrying groceries and sharing a laugh, I'd learned something dangerous. Being near her didn't just feel good. It felt inevitable. Tea happened later that same week, almost by accident. My friend had gone upstairs to take a quick shower before we headed out. That left me alone in the living room, flipping through a magazine I wasn't really reading. The quiet was soft but charged, like the pause before a song begins. Then I heard her footsteps. She appeared in the doorway, a folded basket of laundry balanced against her hip. She didn't look surprised to see me there, more like she had expected it somehow. "You're still here?" she asked, her tone light, teasing in its own way. I smiled. Yeah, waiting for him to finish drowning the whole bathroom. That earned me a laugh, low, rich, the kind that felt like it belonged in a warmer, more intimate place than this living room. She crossed the room slowly, setting the basket down on the couch beside me. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. I watched her fold a shirt, her movements calm, precise, elegant without trying to be. The kind of elegance that doesn't need attention. It simply is. I caught myself staring, and maybe she noticed because after a pause, she lifted her gaze to meet mine. Her eyes held steady on me for longer than felt casual. Then she tilted her head slightly, lips curving in a faint, unreadable smile. "You know," she said quietly, almost as if she were speaking to herself, "you're dangerous." The words landed like a spark in dry grass. I blinked, my chest tightening. "Dangerous?" I echoed, though I knew exactly what she meant. She nodded, folding another shirt with deliberate care. "Yes, you have this way of making people feel seen. It's unsettling." Her voice dipped on the last word, softer now, as though confessing something she hadn't meant to. For a second, I thought about letting the moment slip away. I could have laughed, brushed it off, made some joke. That would have been safer. That would have been expected. But something inside me resisted safety. I leaned just slightly closer, not enough to cross any line, but enough to show I wasn't retreating. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Then handle me carefully," I said. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. She froze for half a heartbeat, her fingers tightening around the fabric in her hands. Her lips parted as if to reply, but no words came. Instead, she gave a soft shake of her head, setting the shirt aside. "You shouldn't say things like that," she murmured. But her voice betrayed her. There was no anger in it, no sharpness. Just a quiet tremor, as though she wasn't sure if she wanted me to stop or keep going. Her eyes flickered away, but not before I caught the faintest glimmer of something raw beneath her composure. Vulnerability, curiosity, a pull she didn't want to name. Then, just as quickly, the moment was gone. She rose from the couch, gathering the basket back into her arms. "I should finish this upstairs," she said, almost brisk now. But as she walked away, I noticed the way her hand lingered on the basket's edge, fingers flexing like they were holding on to more than just folded laundry. And me? I sat there, pulse hammering, knowing nothing between us was ordinary anymore. That night, I lay awake longer than I meant to, the ceiling above me nothing more than a blur in the darkness. Her words kept replaying in my mind. You're dangerous. She hadn't said it as a joke. Not entirely. And she hadn't looked at me like I was just some kid sitting in her living room. No, there had been a flicker in her eyes, something caught between caution and curiosity. And then my reply, handle me carefully. I should have kept that to myself. It was reckless, maybe even unfair. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the way her breath had caught for half a second, the way her composure had faltered, however briefly. The more I thought about it, the heavier it felt. There was no denying the attraction, not anymore. But there was also the reality. She was older, she was my friend's mom, and the line between us wasn't just thin, it was practically invisible, the kind you only noticed when you were already crossing it. I told myself to back off, to put some distance between us, to act normal. But the next morning when I came by the house again, I felt it instantly. She was already doing what I couldn't. She was polite, of course, always kind, always composed. But there was something different in the way she moved, in the way she carried herself around me. Her smiles were shorter, her glances briefer. She spoke to me as though carefully measuring each word, making sure there was no room for misinterpretation. And it worked, at least on the surface. But beneath it, I felt the gap growing wider, and strangely, that only drew me closer in my own mind. At one point, I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water. She was already there, wiping down the counter. The moment she noticed me, she stepped slightly aside, as if to give me space. It wasn't rude, it was intentional, a line being drawn with the smallest of gestures. "Good morning," I said quietly. She gave me a soft nod, not quite meeting my eyes. "Morning," that was it. 2 words, then silence. And yet, that silence carried so much more than words ever could. It was heavy with everything she was holding back, everything I wasn't supposed to want. I wanted to tell her that I wasn't trying to cause trouble, that the pull I felt toward her wasn't some childish crush, that it felt real, maybe too real. But I stayed quiet, because the truth was she already knew, and that's what scared her. That evening, I caught a glimpse of her sitting alone in the living room, her hand resting loosely against her cheek as she stared at nothing in particular. There was a softness in her expression, almost like she was lost in thought. For a moment, I wondered if her mind was replaying the same words mine was. "You're dangerous. Then handle me carefully." And maybe, just maybe, she was trying to decide which part of that exchange scared her more. It was the kind of summer afternoon where the sky turned heavy without warning. One moment, the sunlight filtered lazily through the curtains, and the next, clouds rolled in thick and gray, shadows stretching across the neighborhood. I was on my way out when the first drops of rain started tapping against the windows. By the time I reached the porch, it wasn't a drizzle anymore. It was a downpour. Sheets of water blurred the world outside, thunder rumbling low in the distance. "Don't even think about it," her voice called from behind me. I turned to see her leaning against the doorway, arms folded, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. "You'll be soaked in seconds," she added. She was right. So I stepped back inside, shutting the door behind me, the sound of the rain filling the silence between us. My friend wasn't home. He'd gone out earlier, so it was just the 2 of us in the quiet house. She disappeared for a moment, then returned with a towel. "Here," she said, holding it out. As I took it, her fingers brushed mine. It was such a small thing, but the contact sent a current through me, sharper than the chill of the rain outside. I pressed the towel to my damp hair, laughing softly. "Guess I picked the wrong time to leave." "You could say that," she replied, her voice quieter now. She stepped closer, reaching up before I could react. Her hand moved gently through my hair, brushing away the raindrops I'd missed. The touch was slow, deliberate, too tender to be casual. Her palm lingered for a moment against the side of my face, warm and steady, her thumb grazing my cheek as though she had forgotten to pull away. The room felt smaller, suddenly, the steady drumming of the rain wrapping us in a cocoon of sound. I swallowed, my voice lower than I intended. "You didn't have to." Her hand hesitated, then slipped down, resting lightly against my shoulder. Maybe I wanted to, she admitted, so softly I almost doubted I'd heard her right. Time seemed to pause there, her standing close, the faint lavender scent of her hair mixing with the damp air, my heart beating loud enough I was sure she could hear it. I didn't move. I didn't push. Instead, I lifted my hand slowly, giving her every chance to step back. When my fingers found hers, resting on my shoulder, I covered them gently, not holding tight, just enough to let her know I didn't want her to pull away. Her eyes flicked up to mine, searching, questioning. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence said everything. The pull, the fear, the inevitability of all. And then, almost reluctantly, she drew her hand back. The space between us filled again, though not completely. You should dry off before you catch a cold, she said, turning toward the kitchen. But her voice carried a softness now, like she'd let me glimpse something she wasn't ready to name. I stood there, towel in hand, pulse still racing, knowing one thing for certain. The wall she tried to build between us had cracked. The house had long since gone quiet. My friend had fallen asleep upstairs, leaving only the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood to fill the silence. I wandered into the kitchen for a glass of water, but she was already there, sitting at the dining table, a half-empty cup of tea in front of her, her posture soft but thoughtful. She looked up as I entered, her expression calm, though her eyes carried that same quiet storm I'd been noticing more and more. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. I shook my head, sliding into the chair across from her. "Not really." For a while, neither of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second stretching the space between us. She sipped her tea, gaze fixed on the table, as though avoiding my eyes on purpose. Finally, she exhaled slowly, setting her cup down. "You unsettle me," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her. They twisted gently around the handle of the mug, restless. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I leaned forward slightly, searching her face. "Why?" She hesitated, then gave a small shake of her head. "Because you look at me as if," her voice trailed off. She pressed her lips together, as though the words were too dangerous to finish. "As if what?" I asked quietly. Her eyes lifted then, locking onto mine. For the first time, she didn't look away. The intensity in her gaze was almost unbearable, pulling the air from my lungs. "As if I'm not invisible," she whispered. The admission hung between us like lightning, bright, electric, impossible to ignore. I leaned in closer, my voice low but firm. "Maybe you've just forgotten what it feels like to be seen." Her breath caught. Her composure, usually so steady, flickered in that moment. The way her shoulders rose and fell told me she was fighting something inside herself. Fear, desire, the weight of what we both knew. I didn't reach across the table immediately. I waited, letting the silence do its work. Then, slowly, I extended my hand, palm open, resting in the space between us. For a long moment, she just stared at it, her expression torn. Then, almost against her own will, she placed her hand in mine. The contact was soft, hesitant at first, but when our fingers began to intertwine, the hesitation gave way to something deeper. Her hand was warm, trembling slightly, as though the choice she'd just made scared her more than anything. I held it gently, not squeezing, not claiming, just being there, letting her feel the steadiness of my touch. Her eyes glistened under the dim kitchen light, and though she didn't say another word, her silence spoke volumes. We sat like that for what felt like forever, our hands joined across the table, our breaths in sync, the world outside forgotten. When she finally pulled her hand back, it wasn't abrupt. It was slow, reluctant, as if letting go meant admitting something she wasn't ready for. "I should go to bed," she murmured, her voice softer now, almost fragile. I nodded, though my chest ached with the weight of the moment. "Good night," I said quietly. But as she stood and walked away, I knew the truth. There was no going back from this. Morning arrived gently, sunlight spilling through the curtains in pale gold. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving the air cool and clear, as if the world itself had been washed clean. I came downstairs quietly, not wanting to wake anyone. The house was hushed, but I could hear the faint clink of porcelain from the kitchen. When I stepped in, she was there, already awake, standing at the counter with a teapot steaming beside her. She turned at the sound of my footsteps. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and in that look was everything we hadn't said the night before. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft but steadier than it had been when she left the table. "Morning," I replied, my throat dry in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She poured tea into a cup and carried it to the table, sliding it gently toward me. The gesture was simple, but when her fingers brushed mine as I accepted it, the touch lingered, intentional, unhurried. "Careful," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "It's hot." The words weren't just about the tea. We both knew that, and I couldn't help but smile back, echoing her playfulness. "I'll be careful." For a while, we sat in a quiet that didn't feel heavy anymore. The tension hadn't disappeared. It was still there, humming like a low note beneath the surface, but it had shifted. It wasn't just fear and restraint now. There was something gentler layered into it, something that felt almost like trust. She sipped her tea slowly, her gaze wandering toward the window where sunlight caught the drops of rain still clinging to the glass. There was a calmness to her, though every now and then her eyes flicked back to me, quick and searching, as if making sure this wasn't all some dangerous dream. Finally, she set her cup down, her hands resting lightly against the porcelain. "Last night," she began, then hesitated. Her voice faltered, as though the words were too fragile to carry. "You don't have to explain," I said gently. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, relief softening her features. "Maybe not, but I think you understand more than you should." I let the words settle, then nodded. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Our eyes held, and in that gaze was a quiet agreement. We weren't going to name this, not yet. We weren't going to force it into something it wasn't ready to be. But we weren't pretending anymore either. When my friend eventually stumbled downstairs, yawning and oblivious, the spell broke, but not in a way that erased what had happened. She moved easily back in her role, warm, composed, untouchable. But every time her glance flickered toward me, there was something new in it, something neither of us would forget. And as I lifted the teacup to my lips, the faint warmth still clinging to the place her fingers had touched, I realized that her warning, "You're dangerous," had never been about me at all. It had been about us. And the danger, I knew now, was worth every careful step. 19.